Dante Duke Williams grew up in the heart of the city in Philly, where street lights doubled as guideposts for survival. By the time he was 13, he had seen more than his share of violence, and the neighborhood gangs were a constant presence, pulling kids in with the allure of protection and quick cash. Duke was no exception. He joined the local crew out of necessity, finding a twisted sense of belonging in a world where every day felt like a battle for survival. But Duke had something most others didn't: a gift for football. On the cracked asphalt and dirt fields of the city, he was a natural cornerback. His instincts sharp, his speed unmatched. Coaches at the local high school saw it too. Despite his rough edges and troubled background, they knew Duke had the potential to be something special. Coach Harris, in particular, took a special interest in him. "Football is your way out, Duke," Coach Harris would say after practice. His voice was full of honest belief. "You've got a future ahead of you, but you've got to want it." For a while, Duke wasn't sure if he did. The streets were all he ever known, and the life he was living didn't leave much room for dreams. But then one night, everything changed. A fight broke out at a local park. One of those senseless gangs fights that could have ended in tragedy. Duke found himself caught in the middle, adrenaline pumping. But as he stared down the barrel of a gun pointed at him, something clicked. He didn't want this life. He didn't want to be another statistic, another kid who never made it out. The next day, Duke walked into Coach Harris' office and said, "I'm all in." From that moment on, he threw himself into football with everything he had. He started staying late after practice, working on his footwork, studying film, and lifting weights. His grades improved too, because he knew that without them, the college scholarships would never come. The streets still called to him, and there were days when the temptation was almost too much to bear. But Duke stayed strong, focused on his goal. By his senior year, Duke had become the best cornerback in the state. His ability to lock down wide receivers was legendary, and recruiters from every major college was vying for his commitment. The boy who had once been lost in the gang life was now the #1 recruit in the country, with a future brighter than he had ever imagined. On signing day, as he put pen to paper and chose his college, Duke felt a swell of pride, not just because of what he had accomplished, but because he knew he had broken free from a cycle that had trapped so many others. Football had given him an outlet, a way to channel his anger, his fear, his hope. It saved him. As Duke looked out at the cameras and reporters, he thought of Coach Harris' words from a year ago. Football wasn't just a game, it was a lifeline, and for Duke Williams, it had been his redemption. As Duke signed his letter of intent, he could feel the weight of his journey in every stroke of the pen. This moment wasn't just about choosing a college. It was a declaration that he was no longer bound by the chains of his past, the whisper of doubt, the allure of the streets, and the memories of his lost friends who hadn't made it out. They all faded into the background. The gymnasium erupted in applause, but Duke's mind was somewhere else. He was thinking of his mother, who had worked 2 jobs just to keep a roof over their head. He thought of his little sister, who looked up to him as her hero. Most of all, he thought of the friends he had lost, those who had fallen to the violence of the streets before they could even dream of a better life. When the cameras flashed, capturing his smile, Duke didn't just see a young man with a future in football. He saw a survivor. He saw someone who had made a promise to himself on that fateful night in the park, a promise to live, to rise above, and to make something of himself. After the ceremony, Coach Harris pulled him aside. There were no words at first, just a strong, reassuring hand on Duke's shoulder. "You did it, son," Coach Harris finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "You did it." Duke nodded, his throat tight. "I couldn't have done it without you, Coach." "You had it in you all along," Coach Harris replied. "I just helped you see it." As Duke left the school that day, the sun shining brightly overhead, he knew the road ahead would be challenging. College football was a whole new level, and there would be hurdles he hadn't even imagined yet. But Duke was ready. He had faced worse and come out on the other side. Football was more than just his way out. It was his way up. And as he walked away from the school towards a future that had once seemed so distant, Duke Williams knew he was ready to climb. As Duke stepped onto the campus of BYU, he had a mix of emotions of excitement and nerves. The mountains of Utah were a world away from the streets of his hometown, but Duke was ready for the challenge. BYU's football program was known for its discipline, hard-nosed players, and Duke knew he had to prove himself all over again. The coaches were impressed with his speed, agility, and football IQ, And by the end of the preseason, Duke had earned a starting spot as a freshman cornerback, a rare achievement at a school with such a storied program. As the season progressed, Duke quickly became a cornerstone of BYU's defense. Game after game, he made big plays, interceptions, key tackles, and crucial pass deflections. His name was on everyone's lips, from the commentators to the fans in the student section, and by midseason, he was being talked about as one of the best young cornerbacks in the country. He was living his dream, excelling at a Division I program and thriving in every sense. But while Duke was making headlines in the papers, trouble was brewing back at home. His mother's health was deteriorating. Years of working 2 jobs, often late into the night, had finally caught up with her. She tried to keep it from Duke, not wanting to distract him from his success, but he could hear the strain of her voice. She coughed more often, and her breathing sounded heavy. Whenever Duke asked, "Is she okay?" she would just brush it off. "I'm fine, baby. Just a little tired." Duke knew better. His mother has always been the strongest person in his life, but now she sounded fragile, like she could break at any moment. The worry weighed on him. Even as he continued to perform on the field, his mind was often somewhere else, and it started to affect his play. He missed tackles in practice, and in one game, he got beat for multiple touchdowns. The coaches noticed it, but assumed it was just the pressure of being a freshman starter. They pushed him harder, trying to get him back on track. But Duke knew the problem wasn't just football. One night at the extremely rough practice, Duke got a call from his little sister. She was crying. "Mama's in the hospital," she said, her voice trembling. She collapsed at work. Duke's world came crashing down. He wanted to be there with his mother, to rush to her side, but the team was in the middle of the season, and his scholarship was tied to his performance. The coaches had always emphasized that football was a priority, but how could he focus on football when his mother, the person who had sacrificed everything for him, was in the hospital? That week was the hardest week of Duke's life. On the field, he tried to put on a brave face, but inside, he was falling apart. He called home every night, desperate for updates from the doctors. But the news was never good. His mother had a severe respiratory infection, and her condition was getting worse and worse. Duke wanted to fly home, but his sister and even his mother insisted that he stay. "You gotta keep playing, Duke," his mother said. "Don't worry about me. You're doing something special. Don't let anything stop you." And on this play, Duke listened to his mother's voice over and over, and he went up, grabbed this interception from this receiver. He tried to take it back, but he's still a freshman. He's not the fastest. And this game didn't go as Duke wanted. He wanted to win this game for his mother, but he know he always have next week. This game against ranked 25 UCF, Duke wasn't going to let them just do anything to his side, even though that they were losing big. Offense went down and scored on Duke's interception. Now, 47 seconds before halftime, we're looking for another interception. And look, when our linebackers get it, I try to go block for him, but I'm just a little too slow. After the game, Duke sat alone in the locker room. He stared at his phone, praying for it to ring with some good news, but it remained silent. He knew he couldn't keep going like this, torn between his dream and his family, but he also knew he couldn't let his mother down. He had come too far, and she had given too much for him to stop now. That night, Duke made a decision. He would keep fighting on the field, not just for himself, but for his mother and everything she had sacrificed for him. He would carry her strength with him every time he laced up his cleats, but he also knew that no matter how far football took him, family will always come first. And as the clock hit triple zeros in overtime, Duke ran to his head coach and told him what has been happening. His head coach told him, "Go be with your family, Duke. Family means everything. Don't worry about the next few weeks. We got this." Duke went home for the Kansas game, and the team actually came away with the dub, making us 3-7. While Duke was home, he stayed by his mother's side, talking to her, telling her about his games and sharing memories. She listened, her eyes filled with pride despite the pain. And when she finally passed peacefully in her sleep, Duke felt a deep sorrow, but also an immense gratitude. He had been there when she needed him the most, just as she had always been there for him. When Duke returned to school, he was different. The pain of losing his mother was still fresh, but it had given him a sense of purpose. He threw himself back into football with renewed determination, not just to succeed, but to honor his mother's memory. He knew she was watching over him, and he wanted to make her proud. As the season came to a close, Duke was more than just a star freshman. He was a young man who had faced the hardest trials life could throw at him, and he had come out stronger on the other side. Football was still his dream, but now it was more than that. It was his way of carrying his mother's legacy forward, of showing the world that no matter where you come from, you can rise above it all.